His name was synonymous with animals, fun, and Australia, though many people might have known him better as the crocodile hunter. He was beloved and admired by his family and fans all over the globe alike. His unexpected death sent a shockwave, and many around the globe felt the sadness of his untimely passing.
Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce.
For most of us, wild animals are incredibly beautiful creatures which are also dangerous, so ultimately best left alone to their own devices. There are some people out there who don't necessarily fear animals, but still carry massive amounts of respect for nature's most extraordinary beasts. There's nothing that could come between them and their huge amounts of love for animals, sometimes not even death. Steve Irwin was definitely such a person. Not only was he a TV personality feeding crocodiles in front of the cameras like he'd feed puppies, but he was also a wildlife expert, an environmentalist, an advocate for nature conservation, and a zookeeper. Steve had lived his whole life amongst animals. His father, Bob, a wildlife expert with a special interest in reptiles and amphibians, and his mother, Lynn, a wildlife rehabilitator, started the small Queensland Reptile and Fauna Park when Steve was a child. The boy grew up around crocodiles, and it's safe to say his wasn't a usual childhood. At age 6, he was given a 12-foot scrub python. At age 9, he was already handling crocodiles, and even wrestled one under his father's supervision. Later in his young adulthood, Steve became more and more involved with the park, but he also worked as a volunteer for Queensland's East Coast Crocodile Management Program and captured over 100 potentially problematic crocodiles. In 1991, he took over the park and eventually renamed it Australia Zoo in 1998, bringing it the recognition it deserved. September 4, 2006 was just another normal day for the TV personality and wildlife expert. Steve was 44 and already had 10 years of experience in television with the smash hit series The Crocodile Hunter, that also gave him his nickname, and as always, couldn't seem able to take a break. He didn't want to take a break. He was in love with his work, both on TV and off camera. He was in love with his wife, Terry, and he was in love with his kids, 8-year-old Bindi and 2-year-old Robert. Life was good, and nothing seemed to be able to change Steve's mind. On that 4th of September, Steve and his crew were at Bat Reef, a part of the Great Barrier Reef off Port Douglas, a small Australian coastal town. They were taking part in a production of a documentary, Ocean's Deadliest. Although Steve felt good and motivated, not everyone on the crew felt the same. His best friend and crocodile hunter producer, John Stanton, couldn't help but feel something was amiss. In fact, 3 weeks before the filming started, John went as far as to call Discovery Channel and asked them to call off the whole thing. But Discovery had already spent a lot of money on the project. John had to make amends with the documentary being filmed, but he still underwent a few medical tests and prepared a will in case something went wrong. For the first time, he couldn't shake the deep fear that he was going to die. And Steve's speech to the crew a couple of days before filming started also disturbed John Stanton. Steve thanked all of his crew for being there and helping him. To any other member, it probably felt like a normal thank you speech. But to Stanton, Steve's close friend, the whole thing felt unusual and eerie, kind of like a finale type of speech. Still, there was nothing he could do. They had to film. Steve Irwin and John Stanton woke up early on that Monday. There was work to do, sure, but they wanted to spend a little time reflecting together before getting down to business. They were on the deck of Steve's 75-foot research boat, appropriately called Croc 1. The two friends looked over the ocean as they had a cup of tea. Steve was happy, talking about how good life was to him. He was in a good frame of mind, always ready for another adventure. But that was Steve, ever energetic, fun-loving, and charismatic. As the day progressed, the crew realized the waters were a bit too cloudy to film for Ocean's Deadliest. There wouldn't have been much interest in a documentary that couldn't actually show the creatures, so they decided to give it a couple of hours, or maybe even a day. But Steve Irwin wasn't one to sit idle and wait for things to happen. He made them happen. Steve saw the delay as an opportunity to film some footage for his daughter Bindi's upcoming wildlife show on the Discovery Kids channel. It was going to be called Bindi the Jungle Girl and have his 8-year-old kid as a presenter. The channel hoped Bindi could step into her father's shoes and educate kids all over the world on nature and its creatures, and Steve thought this a brilliant idea. His daughter was a mini Steve, so it was only natural for her to get her own kid-oriented show. So Irwin told his cameraman, Justin Lyons, to get his camera and prepare for a quick dive. They were no strangers to snorkeling. They initially planned to shoot scenes with a tiger shark, but they couldn't find one. Instead, they decided to film a stingray. They took an inflatable away from the main boat. As they dived in, there was nothing that could have alerted them about what was about to happen. The water was shallow, the divers experienced, and stingrays are not exactly what one would call a dangerous creature. Sure, they have stingers, but they're not usually aggressive. When they sense a potential danger, stingrays either swim away or hide their flat cartilaginous bodies beneath the sand. They rarely attack humans, and when they do, it's because they were provoked, such as when they're accidentally stepped on. Beneath the water, Steve and his cameraman Justin Lyons saw a beautiful short-tailed stingray. It had an approximate span of 6.5 feet from the rear, a beautiful creature, worth showing on TV. They soon finished filming, but wanted to take a quick shot of it swimming away for his daughter's TV show. He wasn't afraid after all. This was a man who handled crocodiles on a daily basis. But something unexplainable happened, something terrible that would change things forever. The stingray became agitated, and in an instant, it jammed its razor-sharp tail up, plunging its barb directly into Steve Irwin's chest. Justin Lyons didn't put the camera down. Steve had been hurt before, but he had a rule for his cameraman. They had to film, always, no matter what happened. So the camera rolled while the stingray started stabbing wildly. By the time the stingray swam away, Steve was standing in a huge pool of blood. The story that came out in the following days was that Steve pulled the barb out of his chest, but his cameraman Justin Lyons, who was there recording everything, said that it wasn't true. The jagged barb went through Steve's chest like a knife through hot butter. Steve knew he was in trouble. He stood up from the chest-deep water and started screaming, "It punctured my lung." But that wasn't the truth. The truth was much, much worse. Justin could see a 2-inch wide injury over Steve Irwin's heart, with blood and fluid coming out of it. He and the rest of the team threw Irwin back into the inflatable boat and sped to the main boat. Justin was terrified, desperate to help his friend, directing other crew members to put their hands over the wound and telling the crocodile hunter he had to survive for his kids. But Steve Irwin calmly looked at his friend and simply told him, "I'm dying," before losing consciousness. The cameraman started CPR. The attack, the CPR, and medical efforts were all captured on film. As soon as paramedics arrived, they only needed about 10 seconds to determine Steve was dead. Even if the crew had been able to get him to a hospital, he wouldn't have survived. The damage to his heart was massive. The footage of his accident has never been released to the public and most likely won't ever be. And just like that, in a few seconds, the beloved Steve Irwin left the world doing what he loved most, interacting with an animal. His wife, Terry, and their kids, Bindi and Rob, were on a trip in Tasmania when they heard the news. Terry was called by the zoo manager, and she had to fight the incredible sadness she was feeling and gather her strength to share the news with her kids. When they arrived home at Australia's zoo, they were surprised to see media waiting for them, but there were also flowers from people who mourned Steve. Terry never remarried. To her, Steve was a soulmate, and no one could come close to what they had shared. Instead, she and their kids took over Australia Zoo and Steve's life work. Both Bindi and Robert are zookeepers and dedicated conservationists, trying to make their dad proud every day. As for the world, it will always remember Steve Irwin not only as a funny, goofy showman, but as a conservationist and wildlife lover who used unusual methods to spread awareness and educate the public on the importance of nature. Probably the strangest and saddest story we've ever told, and the most legendary. It concerns the life and death of Timothy Treadwell, the famous grizzly man, and his girlfriend Amy Huguenard, who were tragically mauled and eaten alive by a wild grizzly bear on the slopes of Alaska one night in autumn of 2003. In this episode, we'll chart the gruesome events of the night it happened and look into some of the mistakes that led up to this terrible loss of 2 innocent human lives and the death of the bear that killed them. Timothy Treadwell, also known as Timothy Dexter, was born in New York in 1957. He had a difficult home life and eventually moved to Long Beach in Southern California to go to college. According to his book, Among Grizzlies, Timothy developed a bad drug habit during this time, and his party attitude eventually resulted in his expulsion from college. By the late 80s, he was seriously addicted to cocaine and heroin, working in bars and attempting to become an actor. The turning point came when he had an overdose. Barely surviving, he knew he couldn't carry on any longer and had to find a new addiction to recover from the old ones. This new addiction became bears. Over the next 13 years, Timothy would travel to Katmai National Park in the depths of Alaska to witness and engage with the wild majesty of the brown bear, also known as the grizzly. As the years went by, he began to style himself as a bear whisperer and gained minor celebrity status as an eco-warrior and animal protector. Every summer, he would go out into the bears' territory and live among them, taking with him a video camera which he used to record hundreds of hours of himself interacting closely, too closely, with the bears, often talking and singing to them as a form of communication. His charming character and apparent fearlessness meant that audiences embraced him as a genius, when in reality, he never had any professional training, and no matter how enthusiastic, he was still an amateur who became lost in his own semi-delusional world and took risks no one ever should. The sad truth is, when dealing with bears or any other wild and dangerous animal, you have to live in the real world. If you don't, death is just one mistake away. The Alaskan brown bear is one of the biggest predators in the world. The adult males can weigh up to 360 kilograms and be as tall as 3 meters when on 2 legs. However, despite their massive size and powerful demeanor, they are generally not aggressive towards humans unless they feel threatened or have become so desperately hungry and unafraid of people that they consider them a meal. This second scenario is extremely rare. The odds of being attacked by a bear are approximately 1 in 2.1 million, and in the 85-year history of the Katmai National Park, nobody had ever been killed by a bear before this incident. One of the key mistakes that Timothy made was believing he no longer needed bear spray to stay safe from these animals. Another mistake was that his constant interaction with the bears had caused them to become habituated to humans, which is when a bear loses all fear of people and may even learn to scavenge food from them. Timothy believed the animal saw him as a friend and a fellow bear, not a human and a potential source of protein. The final mistake, and the most tragic, was that he allowed his untrained and unarmed girlfriend to take the same risks. Amy Huguenard was not obsessed with bears the way Tim was. She wrote in her journals that the bears terrified her, but rather just wanted to spend time with him and enjoy the beauty of the great outdoors. The result of all these mistakes was the ultimate nightmare. The deaths of Timothy and Amy caught live in garish detail on camera as the deadly grizzly attacked their camp. It began on September 29, 2003, just 1 week before their sad demise. Tim and Amy were flown into the park by a man named Willie Fulton. They wanted one last camping trip to observe and record the bears before winter began and the bears went into hibernation. This was also a dangerous mistake, as arriving so late in the season would mean that food was scarce and the bears would more likely be hungry and aggressive. Nevertheless, Tim and Amy pitched camp in the Alaskan wilderness and waited. The video film later recovered from the remains of their camp shows them interacting with various bears in that week, including one huge and irritable animal that Timothy named Ollie, the old grumpy bear. This is the bear that would later attack and eat both of them on the night of October 5, 2003. Everything that we know from that night comes from the evidence of a 6-minute recording during the moment of the attack, which has never been released to the public and probably never will due to its terribly graphic nature. The recording is audio only, as the lens cap had not been removed, and begins after the attack had already begun. We hear the voice of Amy sounding surprised and asking, "Is the bear still out there?" Apparently, she had either turned the camera on out of instinct or Tim had called her to do so. It's believed that Tim was outside at this point, confronting the bear. Abruptly, we hear the sound of Timothy screaming to Amy, "Get out here! I'm getting killed out here!" We then hear the sound of Amy unzipping the tent and going to help her boyfriend, who was being mauled by the bear. We hear her screaming as she and Tim attempt to fight the massive animal. The wind and the rain howl in the recording, and the next sounds you hear are Amy telling Tim to play dead, apparently attempting to confuse the bear into abandoning its meal. On some level, that seems to work as the bear backs off, possibly due to all the chaos and screaming. However, it doesn't leave them alone for long. After a short time, the bear returns and seems to attack with more ferocity. We hear Tim screaming in pain and shouting that playing dead isn't working. He begs Amy to hit the bear, and we hear what is believed to be a frying pan hitting the bear in the head as Tim moans in terrible pain. Amy shouts over and over for Tim to fight back and for the bear to go away, go away. It's believed that at this point, the bear decided to drag its kill deeper into the woods to finish it in peace and quiet. We hear the bear moving away, with Timothy still in its jaws. Amy's hysterical screams are even louder than before, as Tim shouts for her to save herself. "Amy, get away! Get away! Go away!" But it was no good. In the morning, their bloodied and dismembered remains were found buried in small mounds, as bears will often do with a large kill. Willie Fulton, the pilot who was due to collect them the very next day, flew over in his plane and observed a massive grizzly feasting on a human ribcage. He alerted the rangers who met him at the scene, and together they made the gory discoveries and shot the bear. It's a horrible story with a sad ending, but an important lesson. Bears are not cuddly human companions. They are wild apex predators and should be treated as such, or else. How to be grizzly bear safe. Don't go alone. Groups are usually louder and more boisterous than solitary hikers, so the bear is most likely to steer clear of you. Stay on the path. Bears will usually avoid areas where they think humans will be, so it's best to keep to the established routes. Make yourself heard by talking gently and loudly, so the bear knows you are a human and not prey. Remain still. Stand your ground, but peacefully wave your arms. This will help the bear see you as a human. Try to remain calm by remembering that most bears have no interest in you. They usually just want to be left in peace. On no account scream or make high-pitched yells, and never try to imitate bear sounds. This will only irritate it. Make yourself look as big as possible by calmly moving to higher ground or waving your arms. Putting your pack on can also help. Move away slowly while trying to be as non-threatening as possible. Don't climb a tree. Bears are very good climbers. Always carry bear spray. Never get between a mother and her cub. Never leave out food or containers which have food residue. Bears have incredibly powerful noses and they will smell it from miles away. If a bear is acting aggressive, leave the area immediately and safely. It's possible the bear has been food conditioned or habituated to humans. This can be deadly. Siegfried and Roy were a German duo who captured the amazement of crowds around the world with their stage performances. They initially met on a cruise ship and began performing together in the 1960s. They wowed audiences with their circus-like acts and dazzling magic shows. Siegfried and Roy quickly built a name for themselves, and by 1990, they were offered an incredible opportunity to work at the Mirage in Las Vegas. These shows were extravagant and unique. Each year, some 400,000 people watched their acts. They were perhaps most famous for performing with white tigers and lions. Headlining in Vegas propelled them into stardom and fame. They performed to sell-out crowds for 13 years until, in 2003, their show came crashing to a tragic end. From an early age, Roy had a love of animals. He and his childhood dog were inseparable, and he attributed his future connection with animals to that first relationship. While Siegfried conducted the magic tricks and illusions on stage, Roy danced and pranced with the tigers and lions, commanding them to perform tricks and stunts. It was an awe-inspiring act like no other. At one time, Roy had 63 lions and tigers at his home in Las Vegas. They often roamed around his house and garden, even sleeping in his bedroom. He raised many of them from birth. He was the first person they saw and the first person they respected. Roy relied on the trust he built with the magnificent animals over the years in order to command them during his performances. He considered them his family. One Friday night, however, only hours after celebrating his 59th birthday, one of the white tigers turned on Roy. During the performance, Roy stepped onto stage with his favorite white tiger, Manticore. Joking with the audience, Roy said this was Manticore's debut show. In reality, Manticore had first performed with Roy at 6 months old and had done so ever since. They had performed hundreds of times together, and the tiger knew the show inside and out. Each move was well rehearsed. The animals were respected, and they provided something the crowd marveled at. The magical duo have performed over 30,000 shows together. Their daredevil theatrics involved elephants and cheetahs, as well as tigers and lions. They had never had a serious mishap until that fateful day. October 3rd, 2003. As Roy led Manticore onto the stage, it's rumored that something in the crowd spooked the tiger, and it advanced toward the audience. Immediately, Roy put himself between the tiger and the people, commanding him to lie down. Instead of obeying his owner, Manticore grabbed Roy's hand and bit down. Roy shouted at the animal to release, but the tiger resisted. He swiped at Roy's feet, knocking him to the ground, and lunged on top of him. 400 pounds of brute strength pinned Roy to the stage. Then, amongst gasps from the audience, Manticore gripped Roy by the neck. Siegfried rushed at the animal, shouting, "No, no, no!" But Manticore didn't listen and dragged Roy off stage. His master's body hung like a rag doll, whilst trainers rushed at the animal, trying to get it to drop Roy. The tiger did not let up. Backstage, staff hit him repeatedly. They fired a fire extinguisher into the tiger's face. Eventually, Roy was dropped and the tiger ran to his cage. Roy's body lay on the floor covered in blood. The tiger's bite had severed an artery in Roy's neck, crushed his windpipe, and sliced through vertebrae. Staff did all they could to staunch the flow of blood. By the time emergency services arrived, Roy was in critical condition from significant blood loss. Following the attack, there were protests from animal rights groups saying that show animals should be retired. The U.S. Department of Agriculture also opened a line of inquiry into the accident. They claimed that audiences needed to be at a sufficient distance in the presence of such animals. The show organizers refused to release footage to examine whether there had been a violation of the Animal Welfare Act. The case was dropped. Siegfried's mother had bottle-fed Manticore as a cub. He had been rejected by his mother and required around-the-clock feeding. At 6 months old, Roy had bonded with the cub and was introducing him to his live shows. They had a special bond. Manticore lived out his days at Siegfried and Roy's mansion in Las Vegas. At the age of 17, 10 years after the attack, he died from an illness, leaving the German duo devastated. How to be tiger safe. Number 1. Remain upright and tall in tiger territory. Tigers tend to stalk and attack most often, when you are crouched down. Number 2. Remain in groups and close to populated areas. Tigers usually attack solitary animals. Number 3. Constantly change position and look around. Tigers tend to ambush from behind. Number 4. Carry a firearm and pepper spray. Spray is preferential as it is more effective, and firearms can miss their target. Number 5. Make loud noise, and if you know a tiger is stalking you, remain tall and back away.
Miss Chappell, an editor for the hit TV series Game of Thrones, was in South Africa for a volunteer mission. But on one clear afternoon in June 2015, the adventurous 29-year-old American Katherine Chappell embarked on what was supposed to be a thrilling guided safari through the Lion Park near Johannesburg. She was there for the experience of a lifetime, seeing Africa's majestic predators up close. But what was meant to be a dream turned into a gruesome nightmare. Katherine was in the back seat of a safari vehicle, snapping pictures of a lioness basking in the sun. Against all warnings, she rolled down her window. The lioness took notice. Within seconds, the predator closed the distance and lunged. In a split second, the lion had its jaws around her, dragging her from the vehicle as panic erupted. Engineer Ben Govender, 38, who was in the car behind Miss Chappell, recalled that no one could have imagined the horror that would unfold just moments after he captured an extraordinary photograph. The tour guide fought back, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Katherine succumbed to her injuries before medical help could arrive. The attack sent shockwaves through the safari world, a brutal reminder that lions are not the docile creatures seen in documentaries. They are apex predators, always watching, always ready.
Dawn Brancheau made up her mind when she was 10 years old, back when she was still Dawn Therese Loverde, and her parents took her to SeaWorld in California. She'd known right then and there what she wanted to be when she grew up. Seeing Shamu, the world's most famous orca, perform one of the routines at SeaWorld was enough to convince the little girl. She wanted to work with animals. Even better, she wanted to work with orcas, infamously known to the world as killer whales. There are no other animals like orcas, quite literally. While orcas belong to the oceanic dolphin family, they are also the only species in the genus Orcanus. They are among some of the most recognizable sea creatures with their sleek-looking black and white patterned bodies and their dorsal fins. Despite their cute looks, make no mistake, they are apex predators, unrivaled in their natural habitat. Orcas feed on fish, seals, and other species of dolphins. They don't normally see humans as prey, but this doesn't mean our interaction with the species is as limited as it should be. Some populations of orcas are considered threatened or endangered due to marine mammal parks, such as SeaWorld, among other things. And as Dawn Brancheau's story shows, it took a human tragedy for marine mammal parks to adjust their practices and their treatment of the spectacular creatures. The woman first spent 2 years working with dolphins at Six Flags in New Jersey. It wasn't until 1994 that she began her career at SeaWorld Orlando, where she started out as a trainer by working with otters and sea lions. 2 years later, in 1996, Dawn married Scott Brancheau, and she started working with orcas. Her childhood dream was finally true. Dawn Brancheau worked hard for her dream, even when she had it in the palm of her hand. She knew working with orcas was dangerous, though attacks in captivity are very rare. In order to maintain her safety, Brancheau had to be fit. As a result, the trainer ran marathons, lifted weights, and cycled to stay in good shape. By the time she became a senior trainer, Brancheau was already well known. She took part in multiple SeaWorld public performances, essentially becoming the face of SeaWorld. Billboards throughout Orlando showed Dawn Brancheau performing with her beloved orcas. Her shows attracted the public like no others. The various stunts she would perform alongside the mighty animals delighted the young and the old alike. In 2010, Dawn Brancheau was already established as one of the world's most famous orca trainers. At 40 years old, Brancheau was still as dedicated to her work as ever. Seeing the 5'1" woman getting massive orcas to obey her was impressive, and the public relished in her shows. One of the most popular shows offered by SeaWorld in 2010 was called Dining with Shamu. The concept was simple. Visitors enjoyed a meal while being entertained by an orca training performance. After the show, visitors could also go to the viewing area and snap some photos of the orcas. While the original Shamu had died in 1971, SeaWorld trademarked the name and used it for various shows. Even more, several of the park's orcas have been given the name over the years. On the afternoon of February 24, 2010, Dawn Brancheau was set to perform a Dine with Shamu show. Her co-worker for the day was Tilikum Shamu, a 27-year-old male orca who weighed around 12,000 pounds and measured 23 feet. Brancheau had performed with Tilikum plenty of times before, and the two of them were quite close, despite the orca's past history of aggression towards humans. In 1991, when Tilikum was already 8 years into captivity, he and 2 other orcas drowned a trainer at Sealand of the Pacific in Vancouver. In 1991, he made another victim. A man who trespassed in SeaWorld after hours was found dead, lying across Tilikum's back. But Brancheau and the killer whale had developed what was called a close bond over the years. According to John Hargrove, a senior trainer at SeaWorld, Tilikum had a great relationship with her, and she had a great relationship with him. Even more, Tilikum seemed to love Brancheau, and Brancheau most certainly did love the whale. But it was all about to change on February 24, 2010. The show went well at first. Tilikum was obedient, performing all the stunts the way he was supposed to. Brancheau was not alone with the whale. The practice was for each trainer to have at least a spotter, a trainer who would ring an alarm and throw a rope or net into the tank if a trainer were to be attacked by a whale. On that Wednesday, Brancheau worked alongside 2 spotters, Jan Topoleski and Lynn Shaber. The show went well, and soon enough it was over. After the stunts, Brancheau usually had a bonding session with the orcas, just before visitors could come and take pictures of the animals. And it was during the bonding session that it all went horribly, horribly wrong. The 40-year-old was interacting with the orca nose to nose, and then something happened, something that terrified the audience. From where Jan Topoleski was standing, it seemed like Dawn Brancheau's long hair floated on the water directly in Tilikum's mouth. Brancheau struggled to free her hair from the orca's mouth, but Tilikum was known to be possessive. He disliked letting go of his toys. While Topoleski and others saw the whale getting a hold of Brancheau's hair, other witnesses claimed the orca had actually grabbed the woman by the arm. No matter which one of these was correct, there was no doubt about what happened next. Tilikum pulled Brancheau into the pool, submerging the woman underwater. They struggled for a bit. The orca swung the woman in his mouth. Seconds later, Brancheau was seen trying to swim towards the surface. Tilikum retaliated. He struck Brancheau, but the woman persisted. Once again, the orca struck Brancheau. Then he immediately began swimming underwater with Brancheau in his mouth. The animal was agitated, swimming erratically. Staff tried to ask for control by slapping the water, but Tilikum seemed to have forgotten his training. Instead of obeying, he thrashed violently, becoming more and more agitated. Finally, 30 minutes later after Tilikum had begun his attack, several SeaWorld employees were able to redirect the orca into a smaller pool. Tilikum still didn't want to release Brancheau's now lifeless body, but this smaller pool was suited with a very useful addition, a hydraulic base. The bottom of the pool could be raised, which essentially beached the animal. Staff members then used a net to extract Dawn Brancheau from Tilikum's mouth. Brancheau had suffered horrible injuries. Her spinal cord had been severed in the attack, and she had been scalped. Tilikum kept attempting to get Brancheau's body even after she was removed from the water. When her body was placed 5 feet away from the pool, Tilikum kept lifting himself above the pool wall as if he was trying to reach Brancheau. Brancheau died of drowning and traumatic injuries. Her death was ruled an accident. As a direct result of the tragedy, SeaWorld was faced with the need to change its protocol. SeaWorld trainers no longer entered a pool to perform a show following Brancheau's death. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, fined the park in August 2010 for 3 safety violations, citing the company willfully put its staff at risk. SeaWorld filed a series of appeals in order to receive permission to return to water performances, but a special Labor Department commission declined to hear the case in 2012. In 2016, following public backlash, SeaWorld stopped breeding captive orcas. The company pledged to focus on conservation and rehabilitation of the orcas in their care. Orcas are not pets. They are not performers. They are wild animals that deserve their freedom.